Hello, everybody. It is Jacqueline Luqman, and I am sitting outside of our church. We just finished service at our church a little while ago. Had some moderator business to attend to because I'm the moderator for our church, and my husband, Abdus, is in there doing trustee stuff. So because he is a trustee, so we're pretty actively involved in our church. I wanted to just talk a little bit today about how Black people cannot escape politics, even when we are in church, and a little bit how that dynamic is used against us. Because I think that for a certain generation or a certain population of Black people, the church, and I do mean the Black church, has been misleading its congregants about the importance of getting involved in politics. Although being holy and full of Jesus is not going to keep you from being affected by politics. What's up, Otis? I've been renegade. That's why we had to find the church that we belong to now. So, okay, I have to give you a little bit of background on Jacqueline, formerly Jacqueline Malone, now Jacqueline Luqman. Malone is my maiden name. I've been married about 4 years. It'll be 4 years in August. Have always been very interested in politics, but I rededicated myself to my Christian faith, always been a Christian, but, just got annoyed with church as I grew up and really just didn't like some of the stuff that people were preaching in church. So I rededicated myself to my faith, probably maybe around 1999, I guess. I don't know. Probably around 1999, 2000. That sounds about right. And I went to a series of churches that were, to some degree, all preaching the same European-focused, politically conservative, very heavy on the respectability politics view of the Christian faith. And hey, Daniel, thanks for joining me. And I was very active in youth ministry, and I had a really hard time in youth ministry. I've taught Sunday school. I've taught Sunday school to little kids. I've taught Sunday school to high school students. I've been involved in a teen-focused ministry that was very, very popular and very, very effective in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area until, the adult Christians screwed it up, being greedy and not wanting to spend the money on the kids. But that's a whole different. And I had a really hard time preaching or teaching some messages in the Bible the way they wanted us to teach those messages. Like, I never was really comfortable teaching this idea that girls are the only focus of sexual purity. That always, I never got that. And there wasn't as much emphasis placed on boys and sexual purity. And especially in the Black church, there is no emphasis at all placed on teaching girls and boys how to live in community together. There's all this effort made to keep boys and girls apart, to keep them from having sex and getting pregnant. There's all this focus and effort on that, but then these people wonder why, when people in the Christian church eventually get married, they wonder why marriages don't last, because we don't teach people how to live together. We just didn't. So that was one of the things I had a real problem with. I really was never comfortable with teaching the Exodus story solely from a Hebrew, Jewish perspective, and not equating it to the struggle that Black people have had. I got a lot of pushback from that, from doing that, from not just solely focusing on, oh, hey, this is why Hebrews are the chosen people, because look at what God did for them in Exodus. I could not teach that lesson without saying, well, if the Hebrews were the chosen people because God delivered them from 400 years of bondage, then how come we're not the chosen people because God delivered us and he's been with us through all that we've been through? Yeah, I got in a lot of trouble when I was teaching Sunday school and doing youth ministry and all this kind of stuff. So there was just some stuff I just wouldn't teach. And eventually, once I got married, and my husband is of the same political stripe that I am, there was just some stuff we would not abide in our church. We were going to what I thought was a pretty liberal, as far as theology is concerned, black church. But even there were some problems there. There was still no focus on teaching men and women how to live in community together. There was still no focus on helping single people to really navigate this whole dating minefield. And there was no emphasis on politics. None. Absolutely none. Even though this church was comprised of a population that was pretty young and that were feeling the effects of legislation, policies that were detrimental to a lot of poor black people. So whenever there would be some sermon about, some horrible thing in society that happened to black person, an unarmed black person was shot by the police, it was always glossed over in this church and in other churches that I have been to, with, this is a horrible injustice. And we need to do something about this, but their answer to what they should do about it was always, we need to pray and we need to trust God. Listen, after hearing that as the answer to the oppression and the discrimination that black people face on a daily basis in this country, there are people showing up to these churches who work at jobs who are subjected to discrimination and racism on nearly a daily basis in some ways. Their congregants are the recipients of, or they're on the receiving end of racist and racially discriminatory and racially insensitive policies that make their lives harder. These people are paid less for the same job as white people with the same qualifications. A lot of these people work at jobs where they see the benefit of how white people use their connections to get their unqualified relatives jobs that pay more money than they would make because nobody would consider them for the promotion. I mean, this is the everyday stuff that I have encountered from people I've gone to church with in a few churches. And you got people in these congregations who are hurting because of bad housing policy, because of predatory landlords who keep jacking the rents up regardless of the fact that the cost of living has gone up, but people's salaries haven't gone up. So they don't care that poor black people who've been living in their apartment buildings, exactly, Otis, these people end up training their boss. So these slumlords or these predatory landlords don't care that the people who have been living in their buildings for 20 years, 2-3 generations of people have been loyal and faithful with paying their rent on time. But as soon as they see they can make some extra money off of some rich white people, they're happy to kick these people out. And they don't care where they go. This is the kind of stuff that people deal with. Sitting up in a lot of these churches on Sunday where these pastors are telling them, well, yeah, we know that it's unfair out there in the world, but if you just trust God and just pray, when the praises go up, the blessings come down. And we've got people who are sitting in these pews hurting because of politics in so many different ways. They're being preyed upon in their communities. Saturday through Friday. And on Sunday, they're just supposed to forget all that and live in this ephemeral netherworld of Christian perfection where none of that is supposed to matter. And they're supposed to feed off that emotional, spiritual high for the rest of the week while they go out there and try to survive getting kicked in the ass by the system. That's not how faith is supposed to work. Because my Bible says that faith without works is dead. If we Christians have within us this power, and I understand that not everybody believes this, and I'm not trying to get you to believe it, so I don't even care how you feel about it. But this is our faith. If you believe that we have within us this power that resurrected Jesus Christ from the dead on the third day, explain to me why it is you got a church full of people packed to the rafters from the front door to the back. You got all these people who are filled with the power of the Holy Spirit, and all y'all can do in the face of oppression is pray and send those people back out to an evil and avaricious world that is actively trying to kill them. That's all you can do is pray? That's all you can tell these people to do is pray? That's interesting when I see this in black churches, because see, when I go to white churches, and I've been a member of a few white churches that were politically conservative. And that's important. They were politically conservative. Not every white church, but quite a few of them. Unapologetic about their focus on conservative politics. They didn't even care. They would pass out voters' guides that were printed by some, what do you call it? The Republican, super PACs. Yeah, they would I belong to a church in Northern Virginia where they would pass out a little pamphlet before the service where when they gave you your program, they tucked the little voter's guide in the program outlining the position of all of the politicians in the local elections on the top 3 issues that Christians are supposed to give a damn about: abortion, gay marriage, and sex education. The white Christian people did this. They were fully invested in indoctrinating their congregation on the politics they believed were important to them. Black people don't do that. We black Christians don't do that. Not enough of us. Now, the church we belong to now is Plymouth Congregational United Church of Christ in Washington, D.C. For those of you who are in the area, if you've been kind of curious about, what we do on Sundays and what kind of church people we're around, we invite you to come to service on Sundays. The service is at 8 and 11 o'clock. We come to 11. And our pastor is Reverend Graylin Hagler, and he is always, all the time, preaching about racial injustice, political corruption, corrupt governments, anti-imperialism, the warmongering of the United States, and the oppression of people through politics and policy, and how all of that is ungodly, and it is not how our Father intends for his believers to operate on this planet that he gave us to live upon. People of faith are not supposed to be living in any community and society in which we allow corruption and the abuse and oppression of people and greed to flourish to the point where it hurts people. You can't stop individuals from being greedy, but I'll be doggone if I have to vote for you to institutionalize your greed. So my husband and I had to find this church, and we don't believe it's by accident because we are people of faith. So we believe that the Lord led us to this church. through what, it wasn't an accident. I was watching television one day, and I was watching an interview that was being done on News Channel 8. And there was this bearded old white guy. Well, not white guy, light-skinned guy. Our pastor's light-skinned. There's this bearded old dude who was straight almost cussing this crazy Republican out. And he's telling this guy, you don't even have enough respect for me to acknowledge that I'm right on the history. How am I going to just sit here and believe what you say about your racist claptrap? That he actually said something like that. And this was like 3 years ago. And the announcer at the end of the interview said, well, that's all the time we have. Hey, thank you, Reverend Hagler. And I was like, Reverend Hagler? That man's a pastor? Who church he preach at? We need to go find that church. And that's what we did. That's how we found that. That's how we found this church. I don't believe that was an accident. I believe that was the Lord leading us to this church. And we've been very politically active through this church and because of this church. But having been a member of at least 3 different churches, three different churches since 2000, and I left each of them because of either I was disgusted with the lack of concern for social and political issues that affect oppressed people in this area, or I was disgusted by the level of corruption that people allowed in the church because nobody ever wants to question the pastor on his bull. I can honestly tell you that as imperfect as human beings are, there is no conflict between the true faith of Jesus Christ and the political revolutionaries, especially not when we're talking about Black people, especially not when we're talking about Hispanic people, especially not when we're talking about oppressed women. Because if the Exodus story tells me anything, it is that God is on the side of oppressed people. Oppressed people are the chosen people. That's what that story says to me, not a particular group of people of a specific lineage. If you studied the Bible and the history of the Bible, you'd understand where that comes from. And you'd understand that there are political reasons for why some of the things are in the Bible we read today, why some things were not put in the Western Protestant Bible, and why some things are translated the way they are. We got to be real careful with how we impute what is in the Bible to how we dictate our faith to how we think other people should live. First of all, there are specific scriptures in the Bible that are written for people who are not believers. The rest of that book is for us. There are a few scriptures in there that explain why belief should even be a thing, why you should consider it. Outside of those scriptures, everything else that is written in that Bible is written for people who are already believers. So for us to use the guidance in the Bible to tell other people who may not even be believers how to live, we wrong as 2 left shoes on that. But then on top of that, we're not even applying the principles for protecting the oppressed and fighting for justice on behalf of the oppressed that are in the Bible. And it makes me so angry to see all of these Black churches and these Black pastors not getting out in the streets in support of Black Lives Matter, not getting involved in their community efforts with activists who don't go to their church, who don't even like church. but who are fighting on behalf of the people in that community. It makes me mad as hell to listen to these black pastors get in these pulpits on Sunday and talk about how these people out here who ain't going to church, but who are scraping by a living because they are literally under the boot of the system, have the nerve to waste their time talking about how these people are living and how much money they spend and who they're having sex with, and they're having a hard time because they're not acknowledging the Lord. And no, they're having a hard time because the system is screwing them over, and you are letting the system do it by standing by and telling them that all they need to do is pray. Because see, these people in power know that the only Christians who are going to activate their congregations to get involved in politics, the only ones who are really going to make a serious mobilizing effort out of it are the white ones who've already done it. That's what the moral majority was all about. That started back in the late 70s, early 80s with Newt Gingrich and Jerry Falwell. These people have been planning to install the kind of government that exists in the White House and in federal agencies right now. It didn't have to be Trump. They weren't planning for a person. They were planning for an avenue to implement their ideology into the government. And they've been planning this for decades. Meanwhile, those black folks who started out in the church, who got involved in the civil rights movement because the push for civil rights was and it is a moral issue, especially for people of faith, because those people, many of them, not all, but many of them understood that God has always been on the side of the oppressed. They were the ones who held meetings in their churches to organize for boycotts and marches. They were the ones who held political education sessions in their churches to educate their congregants and community members about the laws that were unfair, that needed to be changed, and how they needed to help people not to be afraid to get out in the streets and put some pressure on these politicians to stop screwing black people over, at least so overtly. But see, what has happened is many of those people have either died off, or some of them have honestly taken the check. I hate to say it, but it's true. Some of them who were a little bit on the younger end of the participants of the civil rights movement, those who have not retired, have honestly made their careers out of capitalizing on their legacy of their work in the civil rights movement. And they take the check for that, and that's all they do. They don't address the continued and persistent political oppression of black and other marginalized people in this country. They're the ones out there talking about things are better than they used to be. And all we need to do is continue to be people of goodwill. And they preach unity, and they preach faith, and they preach kindness, but they don't preach action. And these kids out in here in these streets are waiting for some action. And we are the ones, those of us who were on the younger end of the recipients of the civil rights movement, those benefits that came out of the civil rights movement. There was some progress, not nearly enough, but there was some. Too many of us, because we were able to get a good government job that paid a little bit more than our mamas and daddies made, we were able to get some benefits, some health insurance, and a pension that was guaranteed when we retired that our parents never saw. That was enough for some of us. That was enough for too many of us. And it's those folks, those middle class civil rights recipient black folks sitting up in a lot of these black churches today, looking down their nose at these kids out in the street. And I don't call these activist kids out of disrespect. It's just the next generation. If I had a child, that one of them would be my child, because I don't have any children. They would be, understand, I'm not calling y'all kids, those of you who are on this stream who are in your 20s and 30s. I don't call you kids out of disrespect. I call you kids because I'm 50, honey. That's all. And I recognize that my generation dropped the ball on this. Not all of us, but too many of us. We got comfortable with our middle class job for black people. Okay. Middle class for black people. Cause we ain't really middle class. And our lack of political education shows when we are comfortable with the little bit more that we were able to achieve through the Civil Rights Act, but we are not angry that the inequality, the racial inequality is so great that white people with the same job, same level of education, same level of experience have 3 to 10 times more than we do. And that's not because they're smarter. If you watched our last show on Thursday night, we showed you the clear connections between legislation, politics that kept black people from enjoying the benefits of the New Deal, to the racial income inequality that exists today, that even us middle-class black people experience and live. But because we don't have to march in the streets for the right to vote, so we think, because we are not dealing with 10,000 white men gathering to lynch a black person like they used to do, or 5,000 white men gathering to storm a black community and burn it to the ground and murder black people. See, because we're not faced with legal segregation anymore, and we don't have to dismantle that, too many black folks in my generation believe that we did our job. And we are sitting up in these churches, resting on our laurels, talking about praise the Lord. These kids need to find Jesus, pull their pants up, learn how to speak proper English, and then the white people will respect them and the police will stop shooting them in the back. I've heard people say this. Y'all stop acting like it's not black people perpetuating that white supremacist thinking too. It is. Bill Cosby is an example of that. We talked about that last night on Pitbull and Politics. And I can't help but remind myself, as angry as I get at these bougie black folks. One of my Facebook friends, Arham Hashim, calls them the lumpen bourgeois black people who sit around and look down their noses at poor black people and have so much condemnation for the pathological behavior of black people. And we hear it all over the place from all kinds of different sources. I used to believe some of that stuff. I'm going to be real honest with y'all. The reason I can recognize this stuff is because I used to believe this garbage at some point too. I live in the hood, grew up in the hood. My neighborhood during the late 80s and 90s, my neighborhood was ground zero for drug violence in the mid-Atlantic area, outside of New York City and Baltimore. Yeah, DC was like that. DC used to be called Dodge City. It was so bad. I saw my neighborhood change overnight from a great neighborhood for a little kid to grow up in, wandering around in the woods and discovering the world, to one of the scariest places to be. I couldn't even walk to school anymore. So I grew up during that period where I didn't understand that politics did that, right? That wasn't like black people who didn't have any morals just throwing all their care about life away and saying, "Ooh, I'm going to get hooked on crack." That's not what happened. Politics, policy, politicians flooded our neighborhoods with two things that you couldn't find before: crack and guns. I understood it later That was all about politics. And then you throw in that it was politics that defunded public, federally funded mental health facilities so that they had to let their nonviolent patients out during the day because they didn't have enough money to house and feed them and ensure they were medicated. So they let them out during the day, hoping that they would come back at night. And this happened at the same time that crack hit the streets. So you had a bunch of people who were mentally unstable, self-medicating themselves with a cheap, highly potent drug. And these two things happened at the same time that most major cities stopped receiving federal funds for summer jobs programs. Because up to that point, everybody in my neighborhood who wanted a job during the summer could get a job during the summer, had a job during the summer. All of a sudden, that stopped. And all of a sudden, in my neighborhood, we had homeless people. We had never had homeless people in our neighborhood before. All of a sudden, we had a bunch of businesses in our neighborhood. All of a sudden, these businesses had to close down because they were losing money, because the people who needed to have been looked after at St. Elizabeth's in the mental institution were left to their own devices out in the street. And they were self-medicating with crack. They were addicted. And they were doing what they could to survive and get some more drugs. And all of that was blamed on black people being irresponsible. All of that in the media by these lumpen bourgeois black folks sitting up in some of these churches, by these middle-class black folks who didn't live in the neighborhood anymore once they made a certain amount of money and they moved out into the suburbs, only to find out that the white people in the suburbs didn't want to live next to them either. So they thought they were moving out of an all-black neighborhood in the hood because they didn't want to live around poor black people. So they move out into the suburbs. Then all the white people move out of the suburbs because they don't want to live next to them. And the next thing you know, they're living in another all-black neighborhood, but just out in the suburbs. And this is the divide that exists within the black community. It just is. This is just the truth. And the church is one of the main perpetrators of this divide. And it is a damn shame that one of the most powerful institutions in this community has decided that it doesn't need to use its power for the least, the truly least among them. They keep telling these poor people in these neighborhoods that surround these churches to come in here and pay your tithes, and all they give them is hope. But a lot of these churches won't even help their members or members of the community pay their light bill if they have a hard time. I used to belong to a church, and this really was the reason I left this church. When I found this out, I could not stay at this church anymore. A friend of mine who has now passed away, he was a nurse. He was a home nurse. He was a home aide. And he was laid off. He was in between assignments. The company he worked for went out of business or something or other like that. So he was laid off for like 6 or 7 months. So he had some money saved up, but he didn't have enough money to pay his a Washington gas and light bill. He went to the church and asked for help. The pastor told him that because he did not tithe regularly, the church would not help him. This man was about to get his lights turned off. And this pastor, who would put his children's Christmas wish list in the bulletin for the congregation to decide who was going to buy his kids their Christmas gift, this man told a member of his congregation that that church wasn't going to help him pay his light bill because he didn't pay his tithes regularly enough. That's the kind of garbage I cannot abide from black churches. There are so many black churches in these neighborhoods, in our neighborhoods, that I really would venture to say Nobody should have a problem paying their rent, light bill, water bill. Anybody in that community should be able to go to that church. If the church is big enough and has enough resources to do it, because some churches are, not all of them are, but some churches are, the church should turn no one away for assistance. And I understand that some church members and administrators will say, well, you can't do that because then the church would always be broke because people would take advantage of you. And I absolutely understand that. There does need to be some type of process in place. But the church should never, ever be in a position, especially in the black community, especially not the black church. We should not be in the position of turning oppressed black people away from our tables for help. Eric White said, it's a business. And you're right. And let me tell you something else that a lot of black people ain't gonna tell you about a lot of these storefront churches, or a lot of these little, I call them jackleg pop-up churches in our neighborhoods. That's the hustle, y'all. I understand being called to preach. And my father is an elder in the Church of God in Christ. My daddy swears up and down that I should be preaching somewhere. I do not. So I understand that people are legitimately called to preach, and there are people who believe they have legitimately called by God to deliver a word. I don't know why there needs to be 4 different people in one block with 4 different churches delivering a different word from the same God. But see, this is how I know it's a hustle. For a lot of these little storefront jackleg churches that pop up in somebody's house, you see 3 or 4 of them on the block across the street from each other. That's the hustle, man, because the founder of the church has established a 501c3. And it's a religious institution. So that mug don't have to pay taxes on those tithes and offerings. So every dime he makes is tax free. Oh, you didn't know what that was? Now, I'm not saying that every small storefront church is a tax loophole scam. And I'm not even sure that I'm mad. I'm really not even sure that I'm mad at people who do it, because why should I care how people get their extra slice from a government that takes everything from us? Why should I care? I legitimately don't. I legit don't. Even as a Christian, I don't care. I don't care. I'm just saying, also as a Christian, you got to recognize game, man. Some of these people are just out here pimping people. They are pimping the pulpit for profit. That's all some of these people are doing. Some of these people are in these little storefront, living room churches doing it. And some of these people are in mega churches doing it. But the fact of the matter is, for black people who have the most to lose if we continue to ignore politics and the effect it plays on our everyday life, we can't let our churches off the hook anymore. We can't let our mosques off the hook. We can't let our synagogues off the hook. I'm really thankful that the church we belong to has a very close relationship with a few imams. And we have one imam who comes and he holds services in our church. All the congregation members don't like it, but we don't care. Because, see, that's community. And see, when you have a pastor who understands the history of all the Abrahamic faiths, that stuff doesn't intimidate you having a Muslim up in your church. Because you understand that y'all come from the same father of the faith. Same father, Abraham. Muslims and Christians, same doggone father. Jews too, same father. So, as I'm sitting out here and I'm planning like a protest for solidarity with Odessa with activists in Odessa, yes, in Europe, to commemorate a massacre that occurred in 2014. I'm planning that for Wednesday as I'm sitting here thinking about when we go home, we got to prepare for this interview that we're doing with the Noah Shanga this evening about that horrible smear against her and Eugene Puryear on By Any Means Necessary, trying to connect them to some Russia BS. As we're thinking about how we are going to participate in the anti-war protests that we hope that we're going to work with Cindy Sheehan on, the Women's March on the Pentagon later this year, as we're thinking about how we're going to work with Black activists in our community who don't go to our church, who are members of organizations that do important work focusing on imperialism and war in the Congo. Our friend Maurice Carney from Friends of the Congo, and Netfa Freeman, who is the head of, who is the founder of the Pan-African Community Association. I mean, we are doing all this work, and it is all connected to our faith, because it's, aside from us being Black people and understanding that we're oppressed and understanding that it is politics that oppresses us and creates the need to focus on and advocate against all of these situations of oppression, we recognize that we are fortunate that we are able to do a lot of this activism out of a church that understands the same thing and are fighting the same battles. Right now, we have a program that we're running. We have a board of social action in our church that we're also members of. And we are running an educational campaign that will include a speaking event that is focused on educating Black Christians on the truth about the Israel-Palestine conflict. How many Black churches do you know are actually trying to tell the truth about who's really oppressed in Palestine right now, and why that fight is connected to us and why we should care? And listen, y'all, this is a lot of work to do. It's a lot of work to do. There are a lot of things to focus on. There are a lot of moving parts to this, and it is easy. And I understand that for some Christians, especially Christians who are our age and older, I'm 50, my husband's 51. For a lot of Black folks, we catch enough hell on a regular, in our regular jobs. A lot of people just want to go to church on Sunday and zone out. I get that, because it is a lot. It is a lot to deal with. But we've been afforded the opportunity. We've been afforded the ability to go to our houses of worship without being molested. And unfortunately, for too long, we've taken that and said, well, that's the prize. You know, that's the end result. That's the end result. We just want to be left alone. That's not the end result. Not for people of actual faith. And I'm going to wrap this up, but as our pastor said this morning from the pulpit, and I'll share the Spreaker link with you because he broadcasts on his sermons on Spreaker every Sunday. Excuse me. Like he said this morning, these people who call themselves Christians, who are aligned with that person in the White House, because our pastor does not say his name, those people who advocate for policies that are oppressive to Black people and are oppressive to gay people and are oppressive to women and women's reproductive rights and are oppressive to trans people and are oppressive to Muslims and Hispanics and immigrants. Those people who call themselves Christians, who advocate for those policies that are against freedom and justice for those people aren't Christians. They don't know the God of the Bible. They know the God they created. They know their interpretation, their white supremacist, nationalistic interpretation of the God, because that's always been their interpretation of the Christian faith. But again, once you understand the history of the faith and that it has roots in Africa that they intentionally didn't tell us about, then you understand that the nature of the Christian faith takes on a different flavor. It takes on a different look when you understand where the faith really comes from and who that faith really represents. So those people involved with or connected with or supporting the White House and the person in the White House, and those people who started the moral majority movement and worked up the ridiculous contract with America and have been supporting these Christian colleges like Liberty University, where they have sent their children to indoctrinate them and prepare them to work in the government and take it over. Those people can call themselves Christians, but they are Christians in name only. They are not people of the true faith. They are not people of the true Christ. Those people are us. And I even hesitate to say that because as a Christian, you have to be careful that you don't put yourself on a pedestal above someone else and you don't set yourself up to be better than another person. My bona fides as a Christian will be judged by God alone. I can't even judge my own Christianity. I got to run that stuff by my Father. But my Bible tells me that you will know whether I am a Christian or not by my fruit. So for my brothers and sisters who are black, my brothers and sisters in the faith who are active in their churches on Sunday, I gotta wonder why are you comfortable with not being as active in politics as those Cinos, those Christians, or Chinos? I think it's a better nickname for them. Those Chinos, those Christians in name only, or the Christian Zionists. Thank you, Dolores Pierce. That's what they are too. Why are you comfortable with those people being active in politics, and unapologetically so, to your detriment, while you sitting in church telling your congregants who are being harmed by the policies those people are pushing, but you're telling them all they need to do is pray, love Jesus, and love and forgive their neighbors? That's not what they're telling their people. That they are not telling their people to love their neighbors as far as abortion is concerned. They're telling those people to get out and vote. They're telling their people to get out and vote for politicians who will uphold their values. So my black Christian brothers and sisters, what values do you want to be upheld in the public arena that affect the people in your pews? Let me close with this. Our faith is not intended to be an escape from the problems of this world. We were never supposed to use our faith to tell people to just lay down and take it when the state abuses you, because your reward is in heaven. Our faith is intended as a guide to show us not only how to live in community together, but also to show us the power that we have against an oppressive state. God tells us repeatedly in the Bible that we are to fight for justice on behalf of the oppressed. God says that he will condemn nations that oppress the poor. That's where Jeremiah Wright got his "Goddamn America" speech from. Because God said he would damn nations that oppress the poor. And America is excellent experts at condemning the poor, not just in this country, but around the world. So which principles, Christians, are you fighting for? Are you fighting for the members of your church to just be emotionally and spiritually filled on Sunday so they can face the oppression and the discrimination from the state on Monday with a prayer and a smile? And they continue to let the state off the hook as the state continues to corrupt and destroy what God gave us to enjoy? Is that what you're doing with this faith? The very faith that raised Jesus from the dead on the third day, that's what you're going to do with it? I don't believe God told us to fight for justice as many times as he did. If that's what he intended for us to do with it, heck, if that's what we were going to do with all this Holy Ghost power, he would have left Jesus on the cross. So tune in at 6 o'clock tonight, y'all, where we know that we will have a Noah Shanga on with us. We are hoping to get Eugene Puryear on with us tonight at 6 o'clock. Excuse me. And we're definitely going to have Sean Blackman, who is the other half of the by any means necessary team on, and we're going to talk about this smear against these black activists with that ridiculous Russia smear from the NPR affiliate in Atlanta. Thursday night at 9 p.m., we are going to continue our discussion about the report from the Duke University School of Economic Policy, Economic and Social Polity, from Sandy Darity and Derek Hamilton and Alan Ajit and Miss Chiopra. I cannot remember her first name for the life of me right now. And Antonio Moore, about what we get wrong about closing the racial wealth gap. I think we're probably on myth number 5 now. Stay tuned this week for the next episode in The Rise of the Political Black Left over on Brick by Brick. Wednesday, I think that's going to be Wednesday at either 8 or 9 p.m. We'll see how it goes. I think we're going to relaunch that this week. Please go on Spreaker and listen to Pitbull and Politics. The link is on our page. Our last podcast was last night. We thought it was really great. We had a great time doing it. We hope you enjoy it. And consider supporting Luqman Nation in any way you can, through Patreon, through GoFundMe, through PayPal. You can find us on any of those platforms, any of those outlets, looking under Luqman Nation, LuqMannation. And one of these days, we are going to get some t-shirts made to send y'all for supporting us. So we do thank you very much. Share this video, you all. Invite your friends for our live interview with the Noah Shanga, Sean Blackman, and Eugene Puryear tonight at 6 p.m. And as always, my brothers and sisters, be good to each other, real good to each other. Thank you so much for joining me today. Peace.